TED Magazine podcast. I'm Scott Costa, the publisher of TED Magazine. We're continuing to hit the reset button, something that we're working on through TED Magazine, through NAD, a wide variety of podcasts and posts and stories that we're doing about trying to get 2020 off of the into the rearview mirror and off of the radar and make it a better 2021. And so my repeat guests on the podcast, Andrea, Olson, and Desiree Grace, are joining me to talk about hitting the reset button. Real quickly, Andrea Olson is a strategist, speaker, author, and customer centricity expert. As the CEO of Pragmatic, she helps organizations of all sizes, from small businesses to Fortune 500, and she served as an outside consultant for EY and McKinsey. Andrea is an author of The Customer Mission, Why It's Time to Cut the Blank and Get Back to the Business of Understanding Customers, and No Disruptions, The Future for Mid-Market Manufacturing. Desiree Grace is currently the Vice President Strategic Distribution for the Americas for Panduit. She develops, leads, and drives channel partner strategy, channel partner marketing and programs, develops and deploys the channel sales team, and manages the financial indicators within North America. Andrea and Desiree, welcome back to the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. I love having you guys on.
Glad to be here, Scott.
All right, Desiree, let's start with you. Again, not what I would call the greatest of years, this 2020, and now we're getting to the end, thank goodness. You can't just say, hey, you know what, we're going to turn the calendar and 2021 is going to be better. You got to do something. And you talked about something that I want to jump out at right away before we got started recording, which was, simply put, be positive. Let's get right into that. How do you kind of, turn the tide, say, you know what, there's better things ahead for me?
It's an everyday process, Scott. Mm-hmm. And I think each and every one of us has to have a certain degree of emotional self-discipline. And we can choose to look on the positive, and we can choose to look for opportunities, or we can sit on our hands and complain and whine. But that choice is up to each individual.
And you mentioned, too, something about attitude. It's sort of a situation where you've got to just have the right attitude every day in and day. It's not a turn the calendar, start this on January 1st thing. This is something that you really need to keep working toward, on a daily basis.
Certainly. To me, I've never been a big New Year's resolutions kind of person. But if I see the need to make a change, or I see an area of opportunity, something that needs improvement, it's those decisions every day. If you want to save money so you can go on a fantastic trip, well, that's going to involve making your coffee at home every morning instead of swinging by your favorite coffee purveyor, saving those $5 every single morning. It's going to add up over time, and it's incremental gains on a daily basis. It's the small choices you make every single day, and that requires self-discipline. And when you talk about self-discipline, you need to have emotional self-discipline. It's the ability to put your game face on with your team or your customers, and sometimes it means hitting the reset button. We were talking before the podcast about, maybe something bad happens on the way to work in the days where it wasn't walking upstairs or walking downstairs or, shutting the door to your bedroom, wherever your home office may be.
Right.
But, let's say your kid throws up all over you and you got to walk into a meeting in 5 minutes and be positive and motivate the troops. Not to quote Taylor Swift, but I guess I am, shake off and have that emotional self-discipline to move forward and be positive. Because if you're part of a team, whether you're a leader or a colleague, that energy is contagious. And as a leader, sometimes you have to be really careful not to absorb somebody else's negative energy. Maybe you've got a direct report that's really frustrated about a particular situation. But there is definitely a component of self-discipline that says, I'm going to project a positive attitude because I know this is contagious. I'm not going to take on somebody else's negativity if they've had a bad day. That cancer in the clubhouse that the Cardinals talk about from time to time, really is impactful when you talk about organizational culture, when you talk about motivating a team, motivating individuals, and just simply your interactions with each other.
And Andrea, that attitude stuff seems to really sneak outside the walls of the building, maybe without you realizing it, maybe with you realizing it. I mean, you kind of know the companies that have a great culture that are working toward the future, and you kind of know the companies that are like, are things going wrong in there? Because this nothing seems right to me. I mean, it's sort of like that extra sense that you have as whether you're a partner or a supply chain, customer or whatever you are. I mean, do you see that sort of a thing? It's like, hey, you know what? If we're going to walk around defeated, that's going to resonate. People are going to see that.
Well, it's as simple as, the behavior you have begets the results. And, a thing I like to discuss often is actually the concept of probability. And there is a different attitude of people who look at probability in a logical way versus an emotional way. So, for example, going back to what Desiree said, let's say you got up in the morning and your kid threw up on you, and then you had a meeting, and then something went wrong, and then an hour later, you find out, something crashed and burned. And in that mindset, if you are thinking logically from a probability perspective, just because those three incidents occurred doesn't mean that there'll be a fourth. They're completely separate activities, they're completely separate incidents, and there's no causal relationship between them. But there are a lot of people, and even especially leaders, that start getting bogged down because you go, okay, this is going to be a terrible day. This is going to be a terrible year. And you have this expectation. And because you're looking for it, you find it more often. So, I would say that it's about trying to almost parse out some of these things that we've all felt as challenges within business and within our organizations, and of course with 2020, and saying, okay, these are individual incidents. These don't really apply. This is not a pattern. And what are we going to do to change our mindsets to make sure that we don't look for the negative and we actually look at the logical, practical situation and avoid that mindset?
That's interesting. Andrea, we kind of make it a pattern, though, don't we? Even if we really shouldn't. It's like, how many times have I'll use myself as an example. How many times I'm sitting at my desk like, what else can go wrong today? And then you realize that the 8 things before that really weren't that bad, but you just have that wrong mindset.
Well, but we're pattern creatures, right? We try to look for patterns all the time. And it's, part of that, way, way early on Neanderthal time was for, self-protection, right? You hear something in the woods, you see something rustling, you go, okay, I think that could be a lion, right? And it's better to err on the side of caution, to assume that and think that and be looking for it all the time than the alternative, because you could get eaten, right? But nowadays, we have never really effectively trained ourselves to get out of this, inherent pattern creation, right? Where you see something that, let's say you see it, a shape in the clouds type of thing, right? There's things in your mind that just the way everyone's mind is developed, that you naturally do this. So you have to have a conscious and active thought to catch yourself to change that behavior. And it's just like anything else. If you want to, try working out every day, putting together, a healthy habit, you have to actively work on it all the time. It's not something that you can try to check the box and be done with it after 2 weeks.
And that is, Desiree, again, I know we're going to go back to be positive again, just so you know, but I'm staying on the negative. I apologize. But we have to talk about kind of, again, things changed pretty radically last March or so. And people started to take on new roles and new ways to do the roles that they were doing, Desiree. And then I think there was sort of, don't get me wrong, there was sort of a little bit of discomfort, like I've never done it this way before, but okay. And now they've kind of settled in a little bit. And some of those bad habits now are sort of resurfacing as I'm a little bit too comfortable. And this wasn't a great year. and I'm still comfortable. And so how do we kind of break out of some of those habits and say, we need to push a little bit more and try and find new successes and new ways coming up next year?
Well, certainly, Scott, a lot of it starts with personal ownership and saying, okay, I can't control a lot of things right now, but there are things I can control. And I think that's the place to focus, is on those things you can control, whether it's focusing on looking for ways to utilize this new technology in a positive manner. There's all these articles floating around about Zoom etiquette and Zoom do's and Zoom don'ts, but there's also a lot of opportunities within Zoom or Teams or whatever tool you're using. But technology isn't just a Band-Aid because of a situation that's turned out to be a lot more months than any of us would have liked. It also does represent an opportunity if we've got the initiative and the personal ownership to look at it that way. And I'll share with the podcast listeners the example we were talking about before we started. I have a person on my team that said, hey, you know what? We've got this great tool at Panduit. It's an experience center. End users and distributors love going to it. It really makes our solutions come alive. We're not able to utilize it right now. But wait a minute, maybe we can utilize it. We're in a point where we can have a finite small number of people go into the experience center. What if we do what we would do in quote unquote normal times, where we would plan a sales call or a visit? Maybe somebody is interested in a particular solution like AV. Well, we can schedule a live virtual visit. We can have a subject matter expert on site at the Experience Center outside of Chicago. We can schedule time. We can have customers from Atlanta, from Denver, all over the country. We can all participate in learning more about this AV solution and maybe helping this healthcare customer with their telemed need. We don't have to be there physically. We can take this technology and utilize it in such a way that we can still get the job done. And that was one person with a very creative idea and a lot of initiative who said, there's a way we can do this. So that's saying, okay, I can't control all this crazy stuff going on in the environment, but I can control how I react to it. I can still show the initiative that I'm known for, the creativity that I'm known for, and I can own the success that I have control over. And I think there's many lessons in there for a lot of individuals. Andrea talked a lot about probability. And, I think it's interesting when you look at data and you really look at data. I'll give you a personal example. My daughter's school decided to shut down because 8% of the staff and students have tested positive for COVID. So that means 92% of us that are healthy have to come up with an alternative way of either educating our children or having our children educated. And everybody's hitting the panic button at 8%. And I'm sitting here scratching my head saying, but 92% of us are just fine. Now that's a personal example, but you can take the data and look at it a lot of different ways. And so probability, data, there are liars, there are damn liars, and there's statisticians, but you can frame up how you look at the data, is the point I'm trying to make.
Hey, I want to go back real quick, Desiree, and Andrea, I'm going to get to you in a second about this virtual event that you're doing, at your studio outside of Chicago. The person who came up with this, how do you, and I'm sure she was spectacular, so congrats to her. My hat's off. I'm not trying to say that anything is wrong, but if I don't have that in me right now, I'm an employee and I just don't have that wherewithal to say, you know what we should do? Oh, I'm afraid to tell somebody this. They're probably going to think it's a dumb idea. I mean, how do we encourage that moving forward to make sure that we're not missing these opportunities as managers? And how do we the flip side is too, as a person, how do I finally say I'm stepping up to the plate and I'm bringing the biggest, thickest baseball bat I have and I'm going to hit this as far as I can? How do we encourage that moving forward?
Well, as a leader, I think it goes back to culture. It goes back to a willingness to think differently, a willingness to try new things, maybe a willingness to beta something and say, well, gosh, this is a really out of the box idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but hey, what do we have to lose by trying? And that goes back to that probability and data. You can ask yourself, what's the risk? What's the reward? If the risk is minimal, there is no harm in trying something different. And I think if employees see that, oh, well, we were willing to try this out of the box idea, so maybe we'll be willing to try that out of the box idea. And then it scales and it becomes repeatable. And then it becomes part of the culture. And you're not afraid because, well, Catherine had this phenomenal suggestion to do virtual experience center visits. And, Philip had that fantastic idea to do this other thing that's new and different from our industry. And I think that breeds, oh, well, maybe my wacky idea isn't so wacky after all. Or, hey, we're thinking out of the box, so why not? And really, if there's nothing to lose, the risk is minimal, why not?
And that was going to be actually, Andrea, you used the great word, Desiree, which was risk. And so I'm going to throw it at Andrea, just in terms of, what's the danger in taking a risk? I'm sure that somebody's going to propose something to do, whatever it might happen to be, and then say, all right, well, what's my potential for failure? Everybody goes negative. What's my potential for failure? It's like, at some point, don't you just say, who cares? If we do the same thing we did a month ago, we've fallen into this bad habit and we're not going to get any better. Let's go ahead and, let's push forward and see what happens. Is that a smart move at this stage? What do you recommend in terms of risk? Is there a risk assessment we should be paying attention to?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I think risk and people that take risks versus don't is actually, especially in organizations, is highly misunderstood, because it tends to be in organizations not so much of, hey, we don't take risks, right? And we're not going to do these activities. There are cultures like that periodically. But in an organization, there's a couple things. One is that taking a new idea from someone, right? Someone says, we should do X. The first thing is that everyone needs to buy into that idea and feel as passionate about that idea as the person who proposed it, right? Because the first thing that a new idea activates is work, right? You have to think differently. You maybe have to develop a process. You really often have to do some heavy lifting, unless it's easy, right? Unless it's kind of a softball type of thing.
Yeah.
So the fear is that we spend this effort, and this is not totally conscious, but really in the back of our minds, we think about, I'm going to have to put this effort forward, and potentially nothing could come of it, right? It could be completely useless. In worst case scenario, something bad happens and I look bad, or maybe my team looks bad, or there's some failure that is bigger that impacts the organization. So to me, those are the two big levers in regards to risk taking and the concept of that. But the thing that people have the hardest time about with these new ideas, right? And especially in this time in 2020, where we're kind of forced to say you have to just do something different. You can't do what you've always done. Is that, how do you understand which idea is the right one? And that's what every organization struggles with. We try to look at data, we try to look at things and say, how can we better justify this idea? And say, we're pretty sure it's going to work. And the big thing that people often overlook is context. They have an idea. They say, hey, let's start sending newsletters to our customers, or let's start having virtual webinars. But they don't look at the why, and they don't look at the context of the customer, right? Does the customer want this? How is the customer going to use this? How does it solve one of their problems? Not so much of the company itself trying to just fill the void with activities.
I think that, and Desiree, I think that this is an interesting part of it that you touched on earlier that I want to get into, which is just kind of a daily, sort of what we talked about was, keeping your foot on an accelerator situation. And that is, nobody wants to be in a situation where it's the end of a quarter, or in this case, the end of a year. We're like, boy, that didn't turn out good. It's sort of like an everyday, keep your focus, keep pushing forward, stay out of the bad habits, stay out of the whatever. So how do we build in 2021 to say every day, every 8-hour shift is going to be better than the day before. Every quarter is going to be better than the quarter before it. I mean, how do we get our mindset going? How do we get our strategy focused on making sure that we're not sloughing off and, all of a sudden getting to that point again where we're thinking, well, I hope 22 is better than 21. I mean, how do we stay in our lane going as fast as we can every day next year?
So a couple thoughts around that. Mm-hmm. First of all, hope is not a strategy.
Yes, exactly.
But you do have to know why you're doing things. To Andrea's point, or I'll tell you what she said, mm-hmm. You don't want to be creative for creativity's sake. That's throwing stuff up against a wall. Right. You want to know why you're doing it. Back to my previous example, Catherine is very passionate about customer satisfaction, customer relationships. And we all know that one of the unintended consequences of the Zoom era that we're in is customer drift. And one of the advantages to doing a live virtual event, as opposed to something pre-recorded, mm-hmm. which is by design extremely interactive, is you're continuing a very robust level of customer engagement. And the why behind that is partnership with your top customers. That's a why that makes sense. If you're trying something new because your goal is operational efficiency, that's a why that makes sense. So I think you do have to step back and say, why am I doing these things? Why am I trying to save money? Why am I trying to become more healthy? Why am I trying innovative ways to engage with my customers? Because I care about my customers. That's why. I want to make sure that relationship is still solid and robust, and that I'm doing what I need to do to take care of them. The other corollary I would say to that is you have to be very crystal clear on your goals and your objectives, in addition to the why behind the goals and the objectives. And you need to vet what you're doing against those goals and objectives. And to be very specific about that, what you say yes to and what you say no to needs to be vetted against those goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. And I think what a lot of people forget is it's not just what you say yes to. It's not just what you deploy resources towards. It's also what you decline. It's what you say no to. So maybe what you're saying no to is that really teeny tiny customer that can't engage with you electronically. So they're always a high touch business model. So the risk reward is out of whack. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what you say no to because it doesn't make sense. Or, maybe what you say no to if you're trying to get more healthy is going out for drinks with your friends or having a virtual cocktail party. Mm-hmm. And saying instead, why don't we meet in the park and have a socially distanced walk and talk?
Yeah.
I do think that taking a step back and saying, these are definite yeses, but there's some things I'm also going to say no to because they don't fit with my strategy, my goals, my objectives, and getting comfortable with saying no.
Yeah. A great point. A great point. And I got to tell you, I enjoy having you guys on. You guys have been great this whole year. I think we started doing these back in April or May. It's been, we've been doing a couple of months every month, and you guys have been great, Andrea Olson and Desiree Grace. Thank you both a ton for not just coming on this podcast, but coming on so many podcasts this year. I appreciate your insight and everything that you guys have talked about a wide variety of subjects this whole year. Thanks a ton.
Thank you, Scott.
No, I appreciate it. And hey, listen, if anybody needs to contact me now about this podcast or other podcasts, you can get in touch with me by email. Best way to get in touch with me these days, scosta, SCOSTA at NAD.org. Get in touch with me. Let me know what you think about what we've been doing at TED Magazine. And until we get a chance to talk again, thanks everybody for listening to Distributed with TED Magazine.